The United Kingdom's next Prime Minister will soon be selected. The estimated 170,000 members of the Conservative Party are the only ones who get a say on this, and they're not representative of the British electorate as a whole, being overwhelmingly white, hard right-wing, male and over the age of 55. There are significant numbers of overseas members voting who aren't even British and don't even live in Britain. It's a terrible system for choosing the country's next Prime Minister, open to interference from foreign agents hostile to this country and almost guaranteed to deliver a very right-wing politician. No wonder that Liz Truss is odds-on favourite with the bookmakers to be the UK's next Prime Minister. She's positioning herself as the natural replacement for Boris Johnson, calling herself the continuity candidate. When it comes to lies, U-turns and insults, this is the one thing I can agree with her on. Stay tuned as we look at some of her statements over the last few days alone. If you enjoy watching my videos, please give this one a like and spread the word by sharing a link on your favoured social media platforms. If you subscribe, you can also hit the bell icon to be notified of each new video I release. In the middle of a terrifying cost of living crisis, Liz Truss this week thought it would be a great idea to announce that she was going to save nearly £9 billion a year by lowering the wages of public sector workers, and specifically public sector workers outside of London. Now, the Tory policy, or more accurately two-word slogan, of levelling up may very well have been complete nonsense, which deliberately had no measurable meaning whatsoever, but it should be pretty easy to understand what levelling up doesn't mean. And it definitely doesn't mean saving billions of pounds a year by paying nurses, doctors and teachers in the north of England less money to do the same job as people in the south. The actual pledge set out in Truss's own press release was to set up regional pay boards to set pay rates no higher than market rates in the private sector in each of the British regions. She claimed this would save £8.8 billion annually. After fierce criticism from Labour, the Lib Dems, the unions and many Tory MPs, within hours Truss had done a U-turn and scrapped the pledge. Let's take a look at her explaining why.
The policy that I put forward was misrepresented.
It wasn't. Journalists reported the press release as it stood. Her written statement was worse. It accused the journalists who faithfully reported the press release's contents of willful misrepresentation. There has been no such misrepresentation at all, as Kay Burley pointed out in her interview with Truss on Sky this week.
You said that public sector pay policy has been misrepresented by the media. Here's the proposal that you released. Introduce regional pay boards, tailoring pay to the cost of living where civil servants actually work, saving up to £8.8 billion per year. So how have we misrepresented you so far?
Well, what? And when something is
Just
wrong,
to clarify.
when there's an issue,
Okay.
I deal with it.
Okay.
When something is wrong, see again, channeling Boris Johnson. It was her that was wrong, her policy that was wrong. She messed up, she made a mistake, but is she taking responsibility? Is she? This is pure Johnson continuity candidate stuff. Lying, misleading, taking no responsibility whatsoever.
You highlighted a very specific saving, £8.8 billion. How did you reach that figure?
Well, I don't have the details.
Now, in order to get anywhere near those savings of £8.8 billion a year, a figure, by the way, that Truss seems to have just lifted from far-right pressure group the Taxpayers Alliance, you'd have to include all school and NHS workers in the policy to cut regional wages. Take those two groups out, and the entire public sector wage bill is not significantly more than the £8.8 billion that she says she was going to save. So we know she is lying right here.
It's exactly the same figure, the £8.8 billion, that was issued by the Taxpayers Alliance. They say regional-based pay could allow private sector salaries to catch up with the public sector. This can be done by freezing or reducing pay for existing roles and new positions. In other words, pay cut for nurses, doctors, firemen, police officers in less affluent areas, which is what this gentleman was saying. That wasn't what you were proposing. You've changed your mind.
Absolutely, that was not my intention.
It was her intention. She's lying.
I wanted to make sure that our important frontline workers like doctors and teachers weren't worried.
Right, so Truss admits that the policy was a great worry to doctors and teachers, but only because the policy was misrepresented. If this were true, it would be far easier to explain how it had been misrepresented rather than cancel the entire policy. But nevertheless, Truss chose to cancel the entire policy, which kind of proves it had not been misrepresented at all.
That's why I cancelled the policy. I did it straight away. I was decisive.
She did do it straight away. A total U-turn within just hours of the pledge being announced. That is the exact opposite of decisive.
And I was honest with the public about what I was doing.
Honest? To say your clear policy was misrepresented is the exact opposite of honest.
If it's misrepresented rather than the wrong policy, can't you reshape it and reenact it?
Exactly. This is the perfect question. Now, will Liz Truss answer it?
I'm very clear we're not proceeding with this policy. What's important to me is that we support people at this difficult economic time by reversing...
No, of course Liz Truss won't answer it. In true continuity candidate style, she wants to draw a line under her boneheaded pledge, and she wants us all to move on and talk about what she tells us is important. Here's another question she doesn't answer.
Do you accept that you made a mistake by announcing the policy?
I do accept that the way the policy has been interpreted to cover those people was not right, and that's why I took an immediate decision not to go ahead with it.
Not her mistake at all. It's just those lefty journalists from The Telegraph and elsewhere willfully misinterpreting it and spooking the horses. This, ladies and gentlemen, is your next Prime Minister. God help us.
The points you're making are about a policy that isn't happening.
No, what I'm saying is, should good leaders own their mistakes, or should they blame others?
I'm not blaming
You blame the
anybody
media.
else. I'm saying that the policy has been misrepresented.
She's not blaming others, but she is blaming others. The people she's blaming for getting her into this mess by reporting her pledge word for word.
By reversing the national insurance rise, by getting rid of the green energy levy to save people money on their fuel bills, and that will be my focus as Prime Minister.
A plan to reverse the national insurance rise. Good. I'm okay with not imposing that regressive tax on earned income. But that pledge, and the scrapping of green levies, is a totally uncosted and unfunded proposal, typical of Johnson, and now typical of his continuity candidate.
Regarding the First Minister of Scotland, you said she should be ignored and that she's seeking attention.
Again, good question, referring to Liz Truss's totally disrespectful comments about the democratically elected leader of another country. Would she talk about Zelensky like this? Biden? If I was Scottish, I'd find that incredibly insulting, not just of Sturgeon, but of the whole of Scotland, with their elected leader being ignored and called attention-seeking by the attention-seeking ignoramus new Prime Minister of the so-called United Kingdom.
Is that your view of the First Minister of Wales? Is he seeking attention and should he be ignored?
The reality is that Wales has been let down by 20 years of Labour rule.
So nothing to say about Mark Drakeford, just a generic statement that Wales has been let down by 20 years of Labour rule. OK, is that true? Well, that would mean that in this year's local elections, Labour would have been punished by the Welsh electorate for letting them down over the last 20 years. So let's take a look at the results of this year's elections, shall we? Oh, councils under overall Labour control actually increased from 7 to 8, and Labour added another 66 councillors to the previous 460. By contrast, Truss's Conservative Party were kicked out of power over the one council they did control and went from 197 Welsh councillors down to 111. So almost half of Tory councillors were shown the door in Wales. Sounds to me like the Welsh people feel it was the Tories who have let them down. But you wouldn't expect the Boris Johnson continuity candidate to let the facts stand in the way of a good lie now, would you?
And what I am about is about making sure we bring opportunity, investment to Wales, that we back Wales's fantastic farmers.
This is the woman who, as Foreign Secretary, signed a trade deal with Australia that sees UK farmers, many of them Welsh, losing almost £300 million, according to a report by a cross-party committee of MPs. And for Wales specifically, had they remained in the EU, Wales would still be receiving at least £375 million a year in grants. But in 2021 to 22, Wales has received just £46.8 million from the Tory replacement funding mechanism, the Community Renewal Fund. The barefaced dishonesty of this woman is quite astounding.
On Taiwan, would you as Prime Minister, what approach would you take, or what do you think should happen regarding that? Is controversy over the visit by Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I do not support China's inflammatory language on this issue. It's perfectly reasonable what is taking place, and I urge China to de-escalate.
You can almost feel China quaking in their boots as Liz Truss urges them to de-escalate. This is the woman that Boris Johnson called the human hand grenade, which Dominic Cummings assured us was not a term of endearment. It was because Boris Johnson would send her into situations to blow them up and distract from the main issues. Is that the sort of character we want handling Britain's future relationship with China and other global powers? My feeling is, with her insulting language and misplaced bravado, she will prove a danger to the future security of this country.
On the NHS, it came up a couple of times in the questions in the hall there. How can you put it right? People saying it's failing, it's creaking, and that was happening under Tory rule.
Well, we know that the NHS has really done a brilliant job over COVID, but there is a severe backlog now that we're facing. It's difficult to get a GP appointment, difficult to get a dentist appointment. Ambulance waiting times are far too long, particularly in rural areas.
These issues predated COVID and are the result of 12 years of Tory underfunding and creeping privatisation of patient services.
So what I would do as Prime Minister is make sure we're empowering the front line more, we're reducing the central diktats, reducing the layers of management, so we can allow our fantastic doctors and nurses to get on with their very important jobs.
Empowering the front line more and reducing the layers of management. Sounds like a recipe for a lack of coordination and anarchy at the point of delivery. I mean, is she saying that doctors are being prevented from doing their jobs by central diktats and too much management? Imagine how shocked she'll be when she finds out the real reason is over 100,000 job vacancies, including over 8,000 doctors and 39,000 nurses. And that these levels of vacancies have been pretty constant since the result of the advisory referendum vote in 2016 and definitely predated COVID.
And what I'm about is unleashing opportunity across the United Kingdom, getting our economy growing and delivering for people all over the country.
Unleashing opportunity across the UK. What does that even mean? What government has been keeping opportunities on a leash for the last 12 years? Delivering what for people all over the country? An emergency cost of living crisis? Highest taxation burden since the 1950s? A crumbling NHS? A not fit for purpose social care system? A breaking justice system? Highest inflation rates in the G7? Lowest growth projected next year in the G20 group of largest economies apart from Russia? Taking away our rights to protest on the streets or the rights of lawyers to challenge government policy? Taking away our basic human rights through the proposed Tory Bill of Rights legislation, which significantly omits the rights of women to control their own bodies? They're delivering so much, even Alison Pearson, the right-wing commentator with the Daily Telegraph, is referring to the Deliveroo government, saying it's like waiting all morning for parcel force, only to discover the rat bags have posted a card through the door saying, "We attempted delivery, but you weren't in." Alison Pearson, the Daily Telegraph. But, according to the Boris Johnson continuity candidate, Scotland doesn't have a Deliveroo government.
The Scottish Government are not delivering for the people of Scotland.
And why is that, Ms Truss?
What's happening in Scotland is the entire resources of the Scottish Government are being used to run essentially an independence campaign.
Their entire resources. I don't mean to labour this point, but really? The Scottish Government is really spending its entire resources on trying to deliver another referendum on independence. See, this carelessness with the truth is very Johnsonian, and once again burnishes Truss's credentials as the continuity candidate. More lies, more dishonesty, more careless language. Like this.
Well, the problem with a windfall tax is that it might secure money in the short term. But what it does is it puts off companies investing in Britain in the long term because they think at any point they could be taxed. And I think that is a problem. What we need to show is Britain's open for business. We're a country that keeps to our word of what our taxes are. And windfall taxes are essentially surprise taxes.
Windfall taxes are essentially surprise taxes on surprise profits, used in situations where surprise and grotesque profits are accrued due to market forces outside the company's control, where they didn't earn them nor take any additional risks to accrue them. BP, one of these very companies earning surprise profits and subjected to a windfall tax, has told the government it was the right thing to do. But Truss still doesn't agree with them.
I've already talked about how our corporation tax rate is uncompetitive compared to other countries.
The UK corporation tax rate is 19% currently. That is the lowest amongst the 5 largest economies in Europe, with Spain at 25%, Italy at 24%, France at 26.5%, and Germany at 30%. To borrow Peter Stevanovich's phrase, she's talking absolute bollocks. Another Boris Johnson trait. And just to wrap up this video, let's listen to Truss defending her predecessor, underscoring her credentials as the Boris Johnson continuity candidate.
I supported Boris Johnson for the leadership. I think he did a good job as our Prime Minister.
I love this facial expression of the Conservative Party member as she hears that Boris Johnson did a good job. He hasn't. The government are in the process of dismantling the Northern Ireland Protocol, an integral part of the withdrawal agreement, the foundation of Brexit. Plus, 6 years after the referendum, Jacob Rees-Mogg is saying that the part of Brexit that involves taking back control of our borders and introducing checks on imports cannot be implemented because it would be too costly. Brexit is nowhere near fully done, and the government are in the process of undoing the bit of it that was done.
He delivered the vaccines.
The vaccines were actually delivered by scientists at Oxford University and elsewhere, rolled out by our wonderful NHS. And by the way, it's funny that Truss and her colleagues never mentioned how they delivered the test and trace system with its £36 billion budget. That's because the test and trace programme was placed in the hands of their private sector cronies and was therefore an unmitigated disaster that had no material impact on the progression of the pandemic nor on the numbers of fatalities.
He also did a fantastic job of leading the free world in standing up to Vladimir Putin.
He did not lead the free world in standing up to Putin. The Conservative Party have been bankrolled by prominent figures associated with Putin for years, as I've covered in depth in other recent videos. That, and Brexit, were instrumental in giving Putin the impression that he could invade Ukraine without any real opposition from a newly isolated Brexit Britain ruled by a compromised and corrupted Conservative cabal.
Yes, he made mistakes. That's absolutely true. You know, he said sorry for the mistakes he made.
He said sorry? Oh, that's all right then. I'm sure those people who needlessly died in care homes due to his cavalier COVID policies on hospital discharges will forgive him, along with all those suffering in this cost of living crisis, choosing between heating and eating, and all those younger generations now and in the future who have had their rights to freedom of movement across Europe removed. I'll be back with another video next Saturday. If you enjoyed this video, please do share it with your friends on social media. For now, I'm going to leave the last word to Sky TV's Kay Burley.
You were a Remainer, and now you're not. You supported Brits to fight in Ukraine, then you didn't. You wanted to build on the Green Belt, and now you don't. You wanted to abolish the monarchy, and now you don't. You wanted to arm Taiwan, and now I'm not sure if you're saying whether you do or not. You wanted civil servants...
We do provide them with those
You wanted to
facilities.
cut civil servants' pay in the regions, and then you said you didn't. Will the real Liz Truss please stand up?